Hello, friends. It's so good to have a special guest on my show today. This is Kimberly Miller. Hi, Kimberly.
Hi, Heather. It's so good to see you.
Thanks. You too. Kimberly Miller is the co-author of the book Boundaries for Your Soul, and I loved this book. I was so excited to fly out to one of her retreats that she did on her book. And then when I wrote my book, I reached out to her. I said, "Hey, could you endorse my book?" So thanks again for endorsing my book, Kimberly.
Oh, such a pleasure. It was such a fun book to read.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, why don't we, before we jump into some of our discussion questions, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay. Well, I live on the eastern outskirts of Los Angeles. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I see clients on Zoom mostly now, a little bit in person. But I'm married to my husband, Ken, and we have a little girl named Jenna. And I also host retreats, as you mentioned, and workshops, basically teaching people this integration of internal family systems therapy and the Christian faith.
I love that.
Giving people a chance to experience inviting the presence of God to be near to the parts of themselves that are really hurting. God's care. That's what I do in my counseling practice. You could call it healing prayer, contemplative prayer. You could call it, guided exercises or meditations, but it's really about being still, which you talk about in your book, being still and present with the parts of yourself that are really needing attention and ministering to those parts of you from your spirit-led self within you, and also inviting God to be present with those parts of yourself.
What I really have loved about the work you do is you allow the person to find who God needs to be for them. And many of my clients all know that I'm a person of faith and I value my journey and my relationship with Christ. But what I love and why I was attracted and drawn to you is that you taught me a lot about how to talk, not just to myself, but talk to that God space that I believe in each human that is looking for something beyond themselves. But you're so respectful for it. You don't tell them, this is what God is telling you. You say, what do you think God is telling you as you are navigating this? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Thank you. Well, it's such an exciting experience to get to come alongside people and just create that space for them to really get in touch with what they're experiencing in any given moment. And then, paying attention to where they have their greatest need within, and then inviting the presence of God to be near to that part of them. And then just to listen to what God would say to them and into that place, how God would speak into that place. And what God has to say is always so much wiser than me. So why would I take up the airtime, and he's right there. And also, people have a lot to say to themselves that in them, and that's going to empower them even more than anything I could say,
What would you say to the people who say, well, God's getting after me, or I'm feeling shamed, or I'm feeling fearful? What would you say to those people?
I would say to consider the idea, or ask them if they'd be willing to consider, even just for a moment, the idea that those feelings or thoughts are coming from a particular part of themselves, or potentially parts plural of themselves that picked up those messages along the way from someone somewhere in their environment, and to see if they could actually get some space from those parts themselves, perhaps even try to imagine that part standing back a little bit, or standing behind an imaginary glass wall to get some space from that part, and then to see what that feels like, and see if even there might be a God image within their mind or soul that was developed from an experience of a person, or that they picked up at a church service or something like that, or from reading the Bible, that isn't actually truly representing the living God that loves them. Because God's voice, I tell you, I've gotten to have this experience of witnessing God speak to people, for, over a decade now. And it's just always a voice of love, Heather. And because God is so compassionate and caring, and that's how people experience the true and living God. So if the voice that a person is hearing is one that is shaming or blaming or criticizing, I'm pretty sure I'm very confident that that voice is coming from a part of the client that is not actually coming from God.
Yeah. Well, and the reason why I asked that too, because I think this is how you were so instrumental in my life was, yes, you were, and you are, you continue to be.
Yeah.
I grew up in a faith-based home, a Christian home. I grew up with a lot of religious conversation and a very loving home in some ways, but also when you're told who God is, where it's not necessarily a loving presence, it's somewhat of a shaming presence, like God's going to get you, or you're not going to recover from this, or it's your fault, or a blaming. You kind of get some mixed up messages about who God is. And as I work with people and as they integrate their faith, and I respect wherever it is they're in their faith journey and who it is that they talk with, I really am sensitive to this space, because some people who have grown up in a religious home have gotten this message that they don't quite measure up, and they're a constant disappointment. And I think what was so powerful in listening to you is almost like giving people the permission to take back who God gets to be to them.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
When they were 2 and 3 and 8 and 13 and 22. And as you took people, and as you take people, and you did this for me in your book, as you take them through the different life stages, being able to find out what you were told about God at 5 and what God was really saying to you at 5, that was very impactful in my life.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about that to our listeners who might have grown up in more of a religious home and have confusing messages about a loving voice of who God is?
Sure. I think parts of us can get stuck in the past when we have experiences, like if we hear something about God that's, surprising to us or very powerful, we can get these parts of us that get stuck in the past, and then we carry those parts with us that are at that age, even as we grow up, and so even though you may be a certain age, like 20, 30, 40, you may have parts that are younger that are stuck at a time when they heard a certain message. And, people, human beings at church are just people, and they can say things that are not true, or, not fully true. They can be partly true, but not fully true. And it's just very important to, as an adult, come alongside the parts of yourself that are stuck in the past and make sure to witness and update the parts of us that are younger to bring them up to speed with what our spirit-led self knows to be true.
Yes.
From having experienced God in an authentic way.
I love that. To update and to witness. That's great. That's so great, because it makes me think even recently of I was updating myself because I felt a young emotion. And this is something you've taught me.
Yeah.
And I was feeling very alone in the work that I was doing. And I remember confiding in a friend. I just said, I feel very alone. But all of a sudden, I didn't feel 52. I felt like maybe 8 years old. And you know that feeling of when you feel very young, but you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed that I feel so young because I shouldn't be feeling this.
Yeah. Like, am I still feeling that way? There it is.
Yeah.
Again, it's like an 8-year-old feeling, but now I'm in my 40s or whatever,
Yeah.
I mean, I tell the story in the book. Have you heard about this soldier, this World War II soldier that didn't know that the war had ended, and he was on an island and he was still fighting the war like decades after the World War II was over,
Yes.
And he was sent for, like, people went looking for him and tried to update him and say, hey, you don't have to fight anymore. The war has ended. And he was just so surprised to hear that. But how sad that he was fighting for 30 years longer than he needed to. And I think that sometimes, like, parts of us that just get stuck and they don't know that they don't have to fight anymore, or they don't know that they don't have to carry those heavy beliefs and feelings that are no longer serving them.
Oh, I love that hope that you give people. That must be fun in the work that you do.
It is. It's really rewarding. And after, we've worked with a part, clients always say, I feel lighter. I feel freer. I have more
Mm-hmm.
joy. And they're
Mm-hmm.
just relaxed. You can just sort of feel them relax after they've worked with parts. And I need to do this work myself all the time. Like we never really fully finish or
Mm-hmm.
fully complete the work of healing from the past. But it's like, every time you work with a part, I think all the other parts within the system kind of see that work. And at least it's helpful to try to check in with the other parts and say, did you see what just happened? And then all the parts can go, oh, there's hope for me too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then unpack it a little bit when you're talking about the word parts, just for our listener. What does that mean when you're talking about parts?
Yes. So the method of therapy that I'm talking about is called internal family systems. It refers to the idea that within each person, there's a family of parts that relate to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And this language was developed, it's actually sort of discovered by a man named Richard Schwartz in the 80s, who was working with clients who had eating disorders. And he noticed that they would talk in terms of having parts of themselves. Like they would say things like, a part of me wants to binge and purge, but a part of me hates the fact that I do that.
Mm-hmm.
So he would say, well, let me get to know the part of you that wants to eat a lot, and let me get to know the part of you that doesn't like the fact that you do that, and let's try to bring two parts together into a table and negotiate with one another and
Mm-hmm.
come up with an agreement of how you are going to live your life. And so he just realized, and he was a family therapist, and so he started applying family therapy principles like setting boundaries, and having leadership of the internal parent,
Mm-hmm.
with the parts. And it just developed into this whole school of therapy that's become really popular now,
Mm-hmm.
IFS. And so I didn't create it, but I'm a Christian. And so I liked to, when I read it, I thought this is so helpful. And I believe that Christians could really benefit
Mm-hmm.
from this method by inviting
Mm-hmm.
the presence of Jesus to be with
Mm-hmm.
the parts of themselves that are hurting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Dick Schwartz really, and IFS therapists, they talk about the healing presence of the self, and he capitalizes the word
Mm-hmm.
self, to be present with the parts. And that is true. Like just like the body can heal if you get a cut, your skin can heal on its own. The soul can also heal on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And the presence of the self is healing for the parts. And I believe that presence of Christ is also incredibly powerful and
Mm-hmm.
and even more healing,
Mm-hmm.
than just the self being present with the parts. And he does see the wisdom in inviting spiritual
Mm-hmm.
resources to be with the parts. And of course, everyone has to work out what that means for themselves. But I just wanted the people who are Christians
Mm-hmm.
out there who are
Yeah.
seeking healing to be able to use this very effective, helpful method. And so I tried to translate it for a Christian audience, along with my co-author, Allison Cook.
Yeah. I think that's what I loved about your presenting of this material in a faith-based context.
Mm.
I think you were so respectful of the reader and the person taking the journey.
Mm.
Again, you didn't keep saying this is what God says. You said, here's how you get to check in with God. And by the way, God's voice is a voice of love and caring and gentleness and kindness and goodness. And as we reparent some of our younger selves that might have been dealt anywhere from trauma to just shame or anything else that many of us have grown up in, it's been so powerful for me as a coach to identify it. I don't tread into your waters very much, Kimberly. I like to refer out, but I do see, oh, that's a younger space. And it allows me to kind of hold that space with so much kindness and respect as they're working out their parts of, I feel really stupid, Heather, that I have to talk to you about something that I feel really embarrassed about. Like I don't know how to get up in front of my team of 15 people and I'm nervous about speaking, but I think I should be able to do that. What I'm hearing is a ton of shame coming in that probably comes from a younger place. So I get to gently talk to that space and create more of a conversation around grace versus shame. And then I get to step into a conversation that allows them to almost reparent themselves in that space. And I said, well, maybe you're a better communicator than you think. Is there a place that you heard that before? And it usually goes back to, my fifth grade teacher said this, or my coach said this, or my Sunday school teacher said this about me. And, and I usually just get to listen to that memory, and I'm gently using some of your principles in there to just honor their journey, but also help them reframe. And what was the word you used earlier? Be a witness and
witness and update. Yeah.
Witness and update. And I'll hear them, and my book speaks about this with the false beliefs and the true beliefs. I hear them start addressing these false beliefs that they've outgrown, or it was from a 13-year-old experience when they were humiliated, or it has nothing to do with them as a 45-year-old adult in a corporate world. So all these different things, it's been so powerful for me as I've gently kind of integrated my coaching.
Yeah. And even I can imagine even responding, if somebody says, I'm afraid to speak in front of a group, to say, oh, so it sounds like there's a part of you that has a fear about what might happen. And even just rephrasing or, responding back using the part's language and help them. Because it's really helpful to realize that a feeling that you're having belongs to one particular part of you, and it's not all of who you are. It works the same when you're thinking about other people's behavior. If you have let's say a friend or a family member who's behaving in a certain way, to realize, what? That behavior from them is not all of who they are, but they have a part that's feeling angry at me right now, or they have a part that's stuck in a place of fear. It's very clarifying, and it's comforting, because it kind of reduces the intensity of the feeling like, oh, I have a part that's afraid, and then just try to get to know that part better. Well, how old is it? Where, what's an early memory that part has? What would you like to say to that part that's afraid? Because if I could to sit over here in this chair while I give the talk.
Well, I think you do such an honoring job of doing that. I actually got to watch you in person do this, where it's very respectful to the person trying to navigate all of the conversations that we're having with their parts. And that was a whole new idea for me, to recognize that as a 52-year-old woman, I still have 52 parts almost, of all these different years where I can feel these things. And sometimes they're positive. They're not always negative. I can feel exuberant and excited like Christmas morning, like an 8-year-old, or I can feel also very sad and scared and alone, like a 13-year-old in junior high, where I got to sit at the cool kids lunch table. We can feel all these different parts.
Yeah.
But I think just supporting people to love on themselves and acknowledge that it's okay to feel that has been so powerful, to watch people start making the shift of, I don't have to stay stuck in that. Just because I feel that, that's not who I really am today.
Right. And yes, parts are not bad. They have a full range of emotions and beliefs, just like any personality, but they can be unhelpful or kind of get in the way if they get stuck in extreme roles because of trauma, big T or little t, that they've experienced in the past. But we don't want parts to go away. You can think of them like little children, that you love them, but sometimes you need to connect and redirect, and more helpful strategy.
That's good.
And yes, especially manager parts can be very, excited. They just love to get things done, and that's wonderful. They can just get too extreme sometimes, and firefighter parts can, they can go overboard, but we need those parts of us to help us relax and have a good time and do good self-care. And then those sweet XL parts, they can be very playful and just really love just having a good time as well. But they do that in a younger way. And those are very vulnerable, tender parts of us that we really want to embrace. We don't want to get rid of them. It's just, again, if that's taking over, if that vulnerability is just taking over the whole system, then there aren't appropriate boundaries, and there's not space for the other parts of us. And so that's why the book I wrote is called Boundaries for Your Soul, because we need to have like appropriate boundaries around each of those different categories of parts of ourselves. So we can be, balanced and function in a helpful way.
I love that. I love that you talked about staying balanced. That's so much in the work I do with coaching clients. I work with a lot of high achievers, and they're pretty hard on themselves, and they're what's that?
The inner critics,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we usually have like clusters of parts where if we have like a manager part, we'll have an inner critic that doesn't like the way we're behaving or performing in a certain way. And those critics they can become champions if you work with them. If you say, I have a 3-year-old and I spend a lot of time saying, can you find a more helpful way to say that? No. Can you find a more helpful way to say that? And can you find a kinder way to say that to someone?
Uh-huh.
She'll just say, I want such and such. And I was like, can you say that in a sweeter way? And we need to say that to our parts sometimes. We've got these inner critics that are just beating us up. And
Yes.
I like to say to the inner, because they're young too, those inner critics. And I like to say to critics, can you find a more encouraging, gentle way to say the same thing?
Mhm.
And then even those critics can learn. They don't actually have to beat you over the head to help you become more effective and productive.
Mhm. Do you ever run into a high resistance where people are very committed to their inner critics because it feels like they're truth tellers?
Yes. Yes. And they'll say, it's not a part, it's just me.
Mhm.
And, and then when that happens, you just speak directly to the person.
Mm.
That's called direct access. You just say, okay. So, and you speak to them as if they're the critics. So you'd say to the client, so what do you find useful about criticizing yourself?
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, it helps me achieve. Well, are you aware of any negative consequences of
Mhm.
criticism? Well, then I feel a lot of shame. Or would you be willing to even try for a minute or two a different approach to
Mhm.
the same end? Would you
Mhm.
be willing to try to encourage, um, or even just sort of soften the criticism just a little bit? And we
Mhm.
try that just for a moment and see what that feels like. And usually they like that better.
Oh, I love that. Oh, you're such a kind counselor. I love that. You have found a way to say it kindly, Kimberly. Well done.
Well, not always. Yeah, I have my moments where,
Don't we all?
yeah, still learning. Still
Yeah.
growing. Yeah.
So you got to experience my book a little bit, 3C Living,
Yeah.
clarity, confidence, courage. Any
Love it.
thoughts on that and the work that you do?
Oh, I just love it. I love the invitation to, be still and really listen to what you're really wanting.
Mm.
And that's such a positive encouragement to people because I think, we can get so distracted, which your book talks a lot about, just distracted by different parts of us, just a lot of internal chatter that can
Mhm.
get in the way of really that authentic living. And so your
Mhm.
book is so wonderful at just inviting people to just listen to their truest self and
Mm.
ask, what do I really want?
Mhm.
Where do I want to go with my life? Who do I really want to be?
Mhm.
And that inviting people to that stillness, I think is always so helpful,
Mhm.
and so positive.
I found that question. You've probably found this in your work as too, and kind of some of the overlap that we both do with clients. But I found that question to be a very vulnerable question. What do you want? Have you found that when you work with people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's because scary for some people to realize they may not be doing what they really want to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's so important, and I think it's good if it's asked as early on as possible because otherwise people can get down a path and go for a long time without actually really doing what they meant to do, what they
Mm.
were. No.
Yeah. 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 Hence the title of my book, The Life You're Made For.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm gonna put the true belief on the title there. Everybody gets the life that they're made for. And that's the
Great.
work that I do in coaching. And I know
Yeah.
it's something that you value as a counselor too. Can you speak to a little bit about your value on how we're all each uniquely made and we get to step into that life?
Yes, and I think that is just one of the most important messages for people to realize because, comparison is just a thief of joy, and
Mhm.
when we compare ourselves to one another, we can just become so depressed and feel so much shame. But the truth is God made each person to be a unique person. No one else is like you. And
Mhm.
I always think of flowers like does the world really like do you really want there to be only one kind of flower out there in the world?
Mhm.
Isn't it great
Mhm.
there's so many different kinds of flowers? And that's how
Yeah.
God is. He loves diversity and
Mm.
he loves color and he loves just variety. And
Mhm.
And once you really get a hold of the idea that there's nobody like you in the entire world,
Mm-hmm.
that can just be so liberating
Mm-hmm.
and freeing, and you can just finally really live into the beauty that is you. And
Mm-hmm.
and then to listen to God say, every day God has plans for you. That's a biblical concept that God
Mm-hmm.
had plans for you.
Mm-hmm.
It uses the analogy of a book that written in his book uh, before each day came to be. And
Mm-hmm.
he has prepared in advance good works for you to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I listened to the Pray As You Go app. I love that app. And I was listening to it this morning, and it was talking about a saint who heard back in the 13th century Jesus say, listen to me, listen to what I'm telling you to do in this day. And I will guide you and show you what I want you to do throughout the day today. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I met a man once who said, I don't have a ministry of ability. I have a ministry of availability. And he would just spend his days just listening to what God wanted him to do. And then he would just go around serving people.
Wow.
I have an aunt who's a biblical counselor, June Hunt is her name.
Oh, yeah.
And she I spend a lot of time going to family events with her. And before we walk into a family event, she'll say, now let's just pray and ask God to show us what he wants us to do during this gathering. Is
Wow.
somebody that might need some loving care.
Yeah.
And show us, Lord, as we just spend these hours together, who is hurting and who we can come alongside. And it's so fun because when I'm with her at these family gatherings, the people that are like hurting and really needing attention, they'll just start gravitating toward her. They'll kind of like fall around like little puppies,
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
I want to be like that. I want to be somebody that's available to be used by God.
Yeah. I love that. And even in the corporate space, I do what's called inviting in and rejecting. So I'll start any retreat, any meeting, any conference that we're working on. I'm like, okay, we're all here. What would you like to invite in? It's always so powerful to hear what people want to invite in. It's just like connection, relationship, trust, beauty, freedom, peace. I've heard it all, ease. And it's this awareness that you get to bring your own mindset to whatever space you're involved in. And you can do it through praying and to Jesus Christ. And you can do it by that mindset of also just saying, I get to choose who I'm going to be and what I'm going to bring into this space in this room. It is so beautifully empowering as I've empowered people to do that, regardless of your faith. I just go, I don't even care what you believe. Just recognize the power of the energy of what you're bringing in this room is such a powerful place. But I notice a lot of humans are not aware of what they get to bring. And then equally, I get to say, and you get to reject something. What do you want to reject? And I'll hear chaos or confusion, comparison. I'll hear it all. And for them to actually say it out loud and then also own that awareness of their mindset is just so empowering. And that's what I hear your June Hunt, did you say her name was? Yeah, your family member doing that. She's just owning that space and what she's going to bring into that room. And she's calling on her higher power, which is God, and saying, I'm bringing this in, which is really powerful. I love that thought.
It's just living life on mission, on mission to love people and to care for people.
Yeah.
To be an instrument of God's peace.
Oh, I love that.
Not to let the internal chatter within you from the past really take over, but I love, Heather, the imagery of a table and parts of you sitting around a table. I found that to be really, really helpful. And if a person is starting to feel anxiety or fear or shame, to just invite that part to sit as an honored guest at the table within them. And you yourself are looking out at the table, and then you've got these different parts around you that may be very young, holding these different feelings of fear, shame, guilt, but they're welcome at the table, but they're not taking over, table, because it helps the person get space from their thoughts and feelings and not be overwhelmed by them. And then you could invite however you want to express the sacred presence of God to be at the table. For me, it feels very natural for me to say to invite Jesus to be sitting at the table. And it's kind of like the image of the Last Supper, just invite Jesus to just be there, blessing all the different parts and help them recognize one another and recognize him. And then you've got, if you have that image of your internal world, wherever you go, then as feelings come up, you can just say, okay, I see you. I welcome you. I honor you, and come sit at the table with other parts of me.
That's beautiful. I just want to bask in that for a second.
It's super helpful. I mean, I mean, you can incorporate that with a fireside, the campfire imagery in your book. Maybe like when we were the retreat at my house, I remember we hung by the fire. Right, we had a fire
in
the back patio, and we all sat around and had a good laugh out there by the fire.
Yeah, I think I teased you about you talking about something. I remember.
Well, I do remember. I was telling a long answer to a really short question. Like, my friend and I had the same earrings, and somebody said, how do you guys have the same earrings? And I started telling this long story. And I think you were like prodding me, saying like, get to the point. And I remember I said, we're sitting by the campfire. What do you think the campfire is for? We're telling stories.
I know. So sorry. I didn't even know you that well. I just decided to start teasing. I'm like, wow, where's this going? That's totally the coach in me. I'm so sorry. And you're the counselor going, I got to process this, Heather. I'm like, I just want to know the ending. Where'd you get the earrings?
Yeah. And the counselor in me is like, let's talk about when we experienced buying the earrings. And so that was hilarious. We got a good laugh that night.
Oh, we did. Oh, well, one of the things I'd love to ask my guests is, I have found that in my work with people, those that are moving into really a commitment of thriving in life and not just surviving, they do morning rituals. And I'm not even going to ask you if you do it. I'm just going to ask you, what do you do as a morning ritual? Because I'm certain you have something. And I just know that when we start our day a certain way, it really sets the tone for the day. So I just want to ask you, what's your morning ritual?
Well, like I mentioned, I usually start off the morning with the Pray As You Go app, and beautiful music. And there's always somebody with an English accent reading the scripture. And that always makes me feel like they're very smart, so.
They are.
They must be right. It must be true because it's an English accent. And then, so they always read scripture, and there's always some really beautiful chanting, Gregorian chant or some kind of music like that. And so that just kind of tunes my spirit to the sacred starting off in the beginning of the day. And then there's questions that they invite you into, I do that. And then I listen to the Insight Timer guided meditations by Richard Schwartz. That's another app called Insight Timer. There's free meditations on there. I just search for IFS or Richard Schwartz. And I like those because he helps you get in touch with parts of yourself, and he just helps you to listen to what's going on within you. So really then I like that, because then I can integrate the truth of scripture and the truth of what I know about God with what I know about myself in that day, and bring those together. I think David Benner talks a lot about this, that, spiritual formation historically, soul care has included both knowledge of God and knowledge of self. But I think that the church has become suspicious of knowledge of self, given the secularization of psychology, given that the field of psychology is secular and has diminished the concept of sin and God, and seen God as a crutch, historically. And so we as a church have to reteach that it's okay to understand yourself and to just take a look at what's going on inside, because it is very important to know yourself as well as know God, and bring those two together if you're going to do soul care.
Wow. I've never heard it said that good before. That's why I was drawn to you, because I think I felt the disintegration. Like I had to commit to either a theology or what I was being told about God, which I was like, I'm not sure what I think, but I feel like myself is getting left behind. And then so you just nailed it. And I thought, this is why I was drawn to you, where I was given not only the permission, but I would say the respect of integrating myself. And I think I was such a huge believer in honoring and respecting each human being, because we're all beautifully complex. And who are we? We aren't God. We're not here to tell people what they should or shouldn't be doing. But if we can serve as guides to really honor their stories and integrate their sense of self with a higher power, what a beautiful opportunity that is to do for people. And I think you do that so well, Kimberly.
Well, thank you. I think it comes out of my own place of searching for healing and relief of pain that I had, frankly, because
Mm-hmm.
I would go to church from a young age and believed everything I was hearing, but I would still leave with the same pain that I went in with. And
Mm-hmm.
even Bible studies, the same thing would happen,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's kind of like I was going to church and going to Bible studies and these church camps and all these things, but my real self wasn't really invited into those conversations. There was no place
Mm-hmm.
for me to talk about my loneliness
Mm-hmm.
or my sense of rejection
Mm-hmm.
or feelings of shame or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I went to counseling, I could talk about those things, but where was my faith? It wasn't there
Mm-hmm.
either.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a therapist saying, "Oh, I see you, your view of God, that's a crutch that you're leaning on." I mean, really, that word was used. And it's like, no, he's real. I really believe in
Mm-hmm.
him.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I finally found a counselor who was the wife of a bishop, an Anglican bishop,
Mm-hmm.
and she didn't lead me in doing it, but I said, "Can we invite Jesus into this process, please?" And she
Mm-hmm.
said, "Oh, sure, we can do that." And so we started inviting Jesus to be present with parts of
Mm-hmm.
me. Just thought, this is finally, I was in my mid-30s, and it was finally what I was looking for. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
"This
Mm-hmm.
is what I've needed all these years, and this is what the church needs." And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't really being done in that way. So any place where there's integration of psychology and spirituality, especially Christian spirituality, I get really excited because
Mm-hmm.
those people who teach about those things I think are few and far between.
Right. And I love, I'm a huge believer in just the holistic, the mind, the body, the heart, and the spirit. And so that's why I love that you're talking about all of these things, both with your education and your background, but also then with your spiritual faith to find that intersection. That's such a gift to offer people. And I guess I want to ask you this. What would you say to people who don't go to church or have been hurt by church or don't want anything to do with church? What would you say to them?
Hmm. I would say my guess is that you come by your feelings honestly, and
Mm,
I respect that very much. And that there's no doubt that the church has done a lot of things that are very painful in the name
mhm,
of Jesus, and that um, it, that is all true. And there's a God who loves you, and I
mm.
want you to miss out on His love, on His loving presence, and walking with Him on a daily basis because of the hurtful things that people have done.
Right. And do they need church to know God?
No, I don't think you need church, but I think
Mhm,
church can be a place where there can be a lot of encouragement.
mm,
It
mm,
might be a process of finding the church that is the right fit.
mm,
And it can be hard to find,
mhm, mhm,
but there are a lot of churches out there, all different flavors, and
mhm,
I think it's worth trying to explore. There's, the Quaker church is a great,
mm,
very welcoming place. There are home churches.
mm,
And just even getting together with people that you respect that are also seeking God and getting together
mm,
and forming your own church. If
mhm.
that's during the
Yeah.
pandemic, my family had a community church that we named, we had the name of our address of our house, and we called it the 11th Street Community
Yeah.
Church. Just the three of us, my husband and me and daughter.
I
And we
love
would
it.
do that. We would do the call to worship,
Yeah.
and we had muffins in the narthex afterwards, and you know, we listened to our sermon online and such. So
I
yeah.
love it. Oh, wow. Well, this has been so great. I appreciate just the time that you've given to me and our conversation. I guess I want to just ask you this last question as we wrap up of what encouragement would you give our listeners out there?
And first thing that comes to my mind, Heather, is draw near to God, and He will draw near to you.
Mm, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, thank you so much, Kimberly. Appreciate your time. I appreciate everything you're doing. I appreciate all the healing that you're doing, and just vicariously, your book has really touched me and the way that you really honor the individual journey and respect what everybody's going through. I think you handled that so beautifully. So just well done on that.
Thank you, Heather. You're such a positive presence in this world. And when I get to be around you or read your book or listen to your videos, I just get so encouraged and it just inspires me. I just want to like pull out a whiteboard and start, designing my life. So
well, I wish our paths got to cross more. So I'm glad we had the excuse to do a podcast today. I appreciate the time.
Too. This was a great gift to me. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, you're so welcome. And where can our listeners find you?
I'm KimberlyJuneMiller.com, and I'm on YouTube as well. And there's some videos on my website if you want to get to know more about things that I teach.
Excellent. And I highly recommend that. I think her system of the IFS is just, it's life-changing. And I think it allows us to really integrate our whole sense of self, mind, body, heart, spirit, and then all the different stages and ages. I just have learned a ton from you. And when I'm dealing with anything painful, I'll refer back to some of your teachings and that, and it just helps me kind of center myself, calm myself down and move through it, or even just knowing who to go reach out to, whether it's friend or coach or counselor. It gives me some guidance of what it is that I want to step into and how I want to step into the conversation. So thank you for all you do.
That's very honoring. Thank you so much, Heather. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, you too. All right. You guys can see her at her website there, and do reach out. And I would encourage you to buy her book, Boundaries for Your Soul. Take care, everyone. Okay. We're cheering you on. Thanks for joining us today. We'd love a review. Helps us out quite a bit. Wherever you are, just drop a review, and you can find out more at heatherpenny.com. Cheering you on.